Servus and welcome to Proper Horror Show. This analysis of Jordan Peele's Get Out most likely isn't going to be what you're expecting. Peele's extremely successful horror debut is arguably the torch that set light to the growing fire of racially focused horror movies, absolutely. Now, The Purge was of course made 4 years earlier and was pretty darn obvious in its subtext, but the key word there is subtext. The Purge still kept the mask on. Get Out is more like the cinematic patriarch whose progeny inherited its intent, but not its subtlety. And so I absolutely understand it that you might expect my analysis to be something like this.
So, you have a movie for me?
What? No, that's the other guy. I'm the intern. I brought you tea? Oh, but while I'm here, have I ever told you how much I hate white people? Sweet. This will not be that, I promise you. From the discourse so far, it seems to me as if reviewers have to either call Get Out a piece of blatant anti-white propaganda or innovative social horror, elevated horror with a timely social message. But the choice is really not a dichotomy, because a dichotomy is surgery to remove a lesbian. We all know this. The discourse on Get Out was initially so polarised and so polarising that it meant you had to watch what you say or they'd be calling you a radical, a liberal, or fanatical or criminal. But I think enough time has gone by now that things are calmer and we can have a much more interesting discussion. Now we're going to cover the propaganda versus elevated timely social blah 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 stuff, of course. We will do that. But I've avoided making a video on Get Out until now specifically because of all that stuff. Those angles, they have been done, and they have been done well. All around good boy and capsaicin abundant channel ER has an excellent video on the politics and the storytelling issues that Get Out has, and so naturally Susan nuked it from orbit as she is wont to do.
It's the only way to be sure.
Get Out really has been discussed so much that I really didn't want to wade in myself. I didn't want to put the sissy into Sisyphean struggle against YouTube's broken copyright system. Thank you, Susan. I didn't want to do all that, suffer all that, unless I had something original and insightful to say. So, what is this original analysis of mine? Well, I'm awfully glad you asked me that. I happen to have a couple of hot takes right here in my brain pan. I was afraid they were going to be here until the next Purge sequel. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Get Out with a little bit of nuance. You know, make it not so black and white. Of the 3 Jordan Peele horror movies I've seen, Get Out is easily the best. I just need to say that first. Now, I hear good things about Nope, but honestly, I tapped out after Jordan Peele defiled Candyman. You know, you can only get burned so many times. Sorry, Daniel, too soon? From watching these 3 horror movies, it is very obvious to me, very apparent, unavoidable, unignorable, that Jordan Peele has one signature flaw, a fatal error that he cannot help making. And that is that the story is going to get broken, ripped, damaged, or dropped on its head whenever Jordan Peele needs to deliver that ideological and social message. Nothing is going to get in the way of the message. Now, this is really obvious in Us, where you'd be forgiven for asking, how on earth a completely duplicated clone populace for the entire US population gets created, maintained, fed, etc. I mean, that is quite a logistical challenge. I mean, who is signing all the purchase orders for all of this? Well, Jordan Peele basically doesn't care and hopes that you also don't notice or care, because Jordan Peele really felt very clever about his metaphor for this othered, disadvantaged class of Americans who are fundamentally exactly the same, except for colour. They're distinguished by colour. Yeah? Do you get it? It's pretty high IQ stuff. I just want to be sure you got it.
After the movie being like, this is a ridiculous movie. This is...
Basically, Jordan Peele's attitude: sod the plot, sod the logistics, sod the accounts department. There is symbolism to mercilessly ram home. What are you doing, step metaphor? Now, to be fair to Get Out, and I do intend to be fair, it is the most minimal, it is the most restrained Jordan Peele movie, it is the best one I've seen, but it still has that same signature flaw. Of course, you can understand that he was just really keen to get that strong social messaging in. It's a very personal movie.
Like the best genre stuff, this is an incredibly autobiographical movie in a lot of ways, isn't it?
Yeah, and
Now, I am not going to make Jordan Peele's mistake. I am not going to put the message first. Before we look at the social messaging in Get Out, what Jordan Peele really wanted to communicate, we are going to look at the plot. Now, I'm not going to repeat the level of dissection that ER and other channels have done. They've done a fine job. I'm just going to address a couple of examples to show how the story did not need to fail. The basic plot of Get Out has a really strong frame. It is our protagonist, Chris, is going with his girlfriend, Rose, to meet her parents for the very first time, and Chris is nervous about how Rose's parents are going to feel about her dating someone, how can I put this, seasoning proficient, electorally homogenous, advertorially omnipresent. He's black. I don't know how I'm meant to say it anymore. Anyway.
I just don't want you to be shocked that he's a black man.
Over in upstate New York, everything's a bit off, and occasionally, way off. Now, I want to be clear here. This is not a problem. I am not faulting Jordan Peele's writing for Chris not legging it now as the weirdness accumulates. Characters not skedaddling as red flags are popping up here, there and everywhere is not only standard for horror, you might actually argue that it is essential in the genre. So no problem here, no complaints.
I just need to go.
As Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard expressed it in Cabin in the Woods, your horror characters have to reject the warning that they are offered.
By the way, I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president in my lifetime, hands down.
If we view horror as a modern-day morality tale, then this is fine, this makes sense. It's the inciting error that invites the hardship that your protagonist must overcome in order to triumph, in order to grow, to learn something, to be morally worthy. It's a genre convention and you have to take it with a pinch of salt. I also have fewer problems with the dastardly scheme that's revealed. Turns out this blind art dealer only wants Chris for his body. I should rephrase that. Eventually the reason for all the weirdness is revealed to us and we find out that the whole trip up to Rose's parents' house is a ruse so that Chris can be used as a subject in a bizarre mad science scheme.
Phase 1 was the hypnotism. Phase 2 is this.
See, all these aging boomers, they want to literally do a forced brain transplant so that their crusty lobes can carry on living in Chris's healthy young body. They want the best of both worlds out of this. They want to have an agile young body that society sees as cool and to keep their own fond memories of William Howard Taft.
Black is in fashion.
This is all fine in the mental investment wiggle room of horror plots. My disbelief can stay suspended here. I'm fine with it. Just as I am not stressing out over how fast the pods can replicate humans in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or the specifics of the DNA melding in The Fly, or Jason Alexander having hair in The Burning, I am not concerned about the brain swapping here. It is fine. I can suspend my disbelief for this very easily. Every sci-fi or horror movie is allowed a bit of phlebotinum in order to kickstart their otherwise impossible scenarios. So a brain swapping procedure is the one that Jordan Peele has chosen here, and that is fine. It's a very personal movie.
In some way, it has to be autobiographical. If you're telling a story and you're not bearing part of your soul or telling your truth, I think that you're not doing that right.
So just to be clear, I'm not complaining about that. I am fine with it. I have no problem whatsoever with the brain swap. The problem with Get Out, the most obvious signature Jordan Peele problem, is in all the story around the brain swapping scheme. That is where the film starts to unravel and come apart even as you're watching it. It doesn't take detailed analysis for you to start saying, that doesn't make any sense. So the most immediate obvious one that you can think of is that we're shown the end product of this brain swapping experiment. We know what it looks like when it works. And you have to ask yourself, is this a desirable end result? Is this something that you think the boomers would want? Why do the boomers want to end up like this? There's a really weird clash in the racial politics of this film. The white boomers, as we're told, they're all racist, just on a more camouflaged level, okay? And yet they want to be transplanted into black bodies.
White black people.
Is that not a problem for them if they kind of look down on black people? Well, let's skip over that. It's fine. We have a throwaway line of dialogue. We'll just go with that one.
Who knows?
We're just going to hand wave that awkwardly. Let's say that the system won't look too hard for missing black people. And that's why they're the target of choice, okay? That's why. Let's just put a pin in that, okay? The bigger problem is the scheme around the brain swap. The brain swap is the goal, but the whole plot to reach that goal is the issue. It doesn't make sense. It's ridiculous. Let's demonstrate this by comparing two other films with similar plot elements, okay? And by the way, I've got to warn you at this point, massive spoilers for these two movies, okay? The Wicker Man and Skeleton Key. The latter is particularly underappreciated, so it's well worth a watch, and I realise that it might actually be spoilers for you, whereas I'm pretty sure if you're watching this channel, you know The Wicker Man. So let me thoroughly, heartily recommend Skeleton Key. I thought it was great. Right. Spoilers ahoy.
There's some fun, ridiculous shit in this movie, and
in Skeleton Key, our Chris equivalent is Caroline, so Daniel Kaluuya is swapped out for Kate Hudson. It's like a reverse Netflix casting, if you will. Caroline swaps her position at a nursing home and takes up a private nursing role at what was previously a plantation. Once again, we've got a bit of racial politics, racial theming in there. You can see why I wanted to compare this to Get Out. But the similarities go even further. After plenty of red flags and red herrings, Caroline finds out that she was hired so that her body could be possessed by boomers. It could be taken over. And those boomers, in turn, are taken over by former black servants. They're still black. They're not servants anymore. Damn it. In the Skeleton Key, our spoopy brain swap surgery procedure equivalent is voodoo possession. And once again, I've got no problem with it. I can suspend my disbelief with no issue whatsoever. In fact, belief and disbelief and its role in that voodoo ritual is actually kind of a fun plot point in the movie. It's kind of meta. I really like it, guys. Watch The Skeleton Key. It's massively underappreciated. Anyway, you can see all these similarities stacking up, can't you? You can see why I wanted to compare them. Effectively, The Skeleton Key is like the inverse of Get Out. Now, what's really instructive here is that despite being a very similar story, effectively the double race-swapped version of Get Out, The Skeleton Key avoids a key problem. And it does this by maintaining the scale of the story very small. That is, the scale on which the story occurs, the people involved, it's very small. They're only needing to do a couple of body swaps every several decades, so very sporadically, and there is an in-story justification for the need to spend a lot of time with the target of the possession scheme. It acts as a tap on the villain's power, essentially, that necessitates the lengthy investment in the victim. This is good, coherent storytelling. Now, over in The Wicker Man, the isolation is easily achieved and is also integral to the plot. Our protagonist is to be sacrificed, not possessed, but the plot is equivalent. Lure someone in with very specific characteristics. In this case, a stalwart Christian who is also a virgin. There is a whole community involved with the scheme too, but they are very isolated and homogenous in their belief. They don't have to worry about the outside world. This helps mitigate the issues caused by having such a large scale, a whole community being involved. That would cause story issues like how do they keep the plot quiet? Well, they're isolated and they're extremely homogenous. They also don't need a sacrificial victim each. Now, one person going missing every decade or so may eventually attract attention, but imagine if everyone here on this island needed their own individual victim. The practicalities of luring folk would be a nightmare, and the hundreds of burning wicker men would end up giving Greta an aneurysm. So the writers, cleverly, didn't burden the plot with that impossible to believe scheme, because only a few seconds thought into the unachievable practicalities would unravel the film. This is good, coherent storytelling. Now, having made those two comparisons, let's reconsider all the story around the brain swap scheme in Get Out. Like The Wicker Man, we have a whole community involved in a devious scheme who hope it can be pulled off. Like Skeleton Key, we have a lengthy time requirement necessitated for the scheme to work. But Get Out has both of these elements together, and it is that starts wrecking the plot. And I don't mean wrecking it in a fridge logic way, like you are going and getting a chocolate mousse after you've watched the film and you start scratching your head and going like, oh, hang on, that didn't make any sense. How does that work? No, I mean, this starts unraveling the film as you are watching it. So, Chris and Rose have been dating for 5 months.
So how long has this been going on, this thing?
4 months.
4 months?
5 months, actually.
They tell us that. They put it in the script. They filmed the scene. They made sure that you heard it, okay? 5 months. And we also see there are about 60 or so people at this gathering who are all hoping for a brain swap. They all want to be freshened up. We know that because of this scene that was in the script and filmed. Let's think about this for half a second. Rose takes 5 months to meet someone, start dating, and get to the meet the parents stage, okay? That's what we're going to go with on average, 5 months.
5 months, actually.
At that pace, it means Rose is going to be able to facilitate 2 and a bit brain swaps per year at maximum, which means a whole load of these people right here are not going to make it. They're going to be discontented. There's going to be dissatisfaction, maybe even revenge. It's going to sabotage the scheme. Why would you sign on for this? So Given that problem, given the significant time investment needed, maybe Jeremy here pitches in. I mean, he doesn't look like a pitcher, but what would I know?
Trust me, Jeremy's wrangling method sounds way less pleasant.
Even with Jeremy helping out and breaking bucks at an equivalent pace, you aren't going to get through this backlog here. And all the people here probably have people they care about who they also want brain swaps for. So it's too inefficient. It's not going to work. This scheme will fail. Rose, it's just too slow. You are going to have to increase your productivity massively. I have an idea. On top of that, you've got to look at how many people are at this gathering. Do they look isolated, or do they look like well-connected rich folk? Right? Do you think the word about this brain-swapping immortality scheme isn't going to spread? Everyone at this auction is going to have people that they care for, that they love, that they want to keep alive, that they want a brain swap for. This is uncontainable, you can't keep it secret, and it is unsustainable. This scheme will not work. It is obvious.
Ignorance.
If that weren't enough, even at this pace, Rose's face is going to be coming up over and over again in missing persons investigations, and it is not going to be long until police track her down and she has to go into hiding at the very least. Basically, she is going to be out of action, and it's just going to be Jeremy pulling double duty hunting booty. This is unsustainable. It's an unworkable scheme. Now, Jordan Peele could have very easily avoided this if he had just kept the scale small, like in The Skeleton Key. If it were only the Armitage family in on this, then you drastically reduce all the issues I've just highlighted. But that thing is, Jordan Peele has a message to convey. It's a very personal film.
You said you're trying to tell your own truth? What is that?
Well, really my truth as a black man, you know, that my perspective that I haven't seen in film before.
That massive plot-breaking flaw is built into Get Out because Peele really, really wanted a scene where a whole bunch of older white folk are bidding on a black guy. Also, we should note, visibly, publicly, out in the open. Now, surely Chris could see this, and maybe that would be enough to put him over the edge, make him ask some questions, make him skedaddle. I don't know. I mean, there's some kind of subterfuge that they're playing bingo, but where's his portrait right there? Seems to me like really terrible writing because JP really wanted that slave auction aesthetic.
No, this isn't going to pass the smell test for anyone. You know, every white person in this movie is evil. You know, you can't make that movie. You can't make a movie where a black man kills a white family at the end in cold blood and the audience is rooting for him. Like, that movie doesn't get made. So, yes, you can.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.
Well,
he really wanted the slave auction visual aid, so he broke the film, broke the story to get it. This is Jordan Peele's signature flaw. And about that, as we know from this scene, the Illuminati need a large number of young, healthy people who won't be looked for when they go missing. So why go with the Chris option? Why not choose a busload of undocumented migrants from south of the border? I mean, you could employ them as landscaping team, you can process them for the brain swap en masse, and as you're hiring them and they expect it to be an under-the-table sort of deal, you can get them in quickly and covertly with no need for 5 months of seduction and enticing one by one. I guess Jordan Peele just don't care about Latinos. This is his victimhood. Sorry, you gotta get your own, Juan. Sorry about it.
Do you smoke in front of my daughter?
I'm feeling the need to say something nice about this film to balance it out. Jordan Peele also loves the imagery and symbolism of hypnosis and mind control, and he builds in a very memorable, unsettling scene and gets in his metaphor of the sunken place. The sunken place is Peele's distinctive depiction of someone being mentally and spiritually suppressed via hypnosis, frustrated but unable to act as they wish. And it is a very neat, unsettling visual for hypnosis, and at the same time, a metaphor for Black Americans' oppression as Jordan Peele sees it.
So you won't be gone, not completely. You'll be able to see and hear what your body is doing, but your existence will be as a passenger. You'll live in
the sunken place.
And this is all grand and clever. This is good stuff. So the symbolism is grand. The symbolism is strong. But when Jordan Peele tries to implement that symbolism in the story, he breaks the story to do it. When hypnosis is used on Chris a second time, we've had the stakes set, we know how it works, and we see instantly how Chris is rendered helpless and vulnerable. It's a good payoff. It helps make this scene, which in my opinion is the best scene in the movie, incredibly tense. This is all good. But when hypnosis is raised a third time, you got to have that rule of 3. When it turns up a third time and Chris needs to evade the hypnosis to survive,
No.
Jordan Peele has Chris save himself by blocking his ears with cotton he has picked out of a tear in the chair. He escaped mental slavery by picking cotton.
Isn't it ironic? Don't you think?
Now, it is funny, sure, of course it's funny. And you know that Peele deposited a whole gallon of Hellman's equivalent onto his keyboard when he thought of that ironic joke. Very high IQ. But does it make any sense? Like, just looking at the scene, you start asking yourself very obvious questions. Did Chris have any time to pick apart the chair arm and get the cotton into both his ears before the hypnosis took effect? I mean, compare it to the second time we saw him get hypnotized. Does he have time? Also, was he even able to get the cotton in there? I mean, look at his range of movement here. Can he even get the stuffing into one ear, let alone both? Just try it yourself now, seriously. Put your arms by your side the way Chris does and simulate the movement. See if you are able to get your hand to your ear and then to the other ear. Give it a go. If you can, how long does it take you? This is what Chris would be up against. I mean, do you have the flexibility? Was there an ADR line about Chris's spectacular case of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that I missed? Because it kind of seems to me like there was no way he could do this. I mean, how is Chris more flexible than the expiration date on a temporary government tax? The answer that becomes immediately apparent is that this does not work at all. It is physically impossible, but Jordan Peele loved the message and the symbolism so much here that he broke the film to get it in. And as I said, this is his signature problem. This infects every film of his I've seen. Seeing it for a third time in Candyman, I decided I was done. I swore off his films because every single one of them is going to have a broken story so that he can preach. If you want to know more, you can watch my full video. It was my Christmas special. Now, it's much harder to show and give you like a definitive example of this because it's much more subjective, but I feel like the message first problem really kind of killed the tone at the end of the movie. Just after Chris escapes, the terror and the scares should really be at their peak. This should be the scariest stuff in the movie. They should be escalating the terror, but Jordan Peele seemed to just rush through this part. These kills, they felt very flat to me, like Peele wasn't really interested in them. He doesn't do any interesting elaborate gore. He just kind of gets it out of the way. This is it's subjective, it's just a feeling I have. But possibly the earlier nonsense that had landed so flat, maybe that just made me uninvested in this bit, but it's not the impression I get. And also, the later escape and fight in the end, and the arrival of the best character in the film for me, that works really well. So it just feels like this section was rushed through because Jordan Peele didn't have anything he could cram into it. It didn't serve the message.
Shit!
There is a lot to love about Roy. One thing in particular, he saves us from the police are evil alternative ending that was originally planned. So I love him even more for that. Peele, however, did save that idea and put it in his back pocket for later use though. I guess that's still a message that he really wanted to spread. These are very personal films.
These fears, justified or not justified, however they come, these fears of mine, I've never seen them portrayed in film, and the whole process of figuring out what this movie was about digging deep and exploring my fears first.
As I said earlier, I don't want to overly dissect the film on a story level because that's been done and done very well by other channels. I don't want to repeat their work. And I've also complained plenty about Jordan Peele's writing, but it may surprise you that my analysis of the film actually has me a lot more sympathetic to Jordan Peele than you might expect. When Get Out became a celebrated success, the instant and very understandable reaction from people who aren't progressives was to focus on the very obvious questions of what Get Out was saying about white people. But I think that was a mistake. It was a misstep. I end up liking Jordan Peele and Get Out a heck of a lot more when I don't look at it through that lens, when I think of it as a message to a very different audience. Because as I see it, Jordan Peele is very clearly projecting his worldview in Get Out. I mean, that's fine. Cinema's always been about projection.
And one of my fears about this movie during the long process of coming up with it is it going to be a racially divisive movie? Is it going to be a movie that, is just awkward leaving the theater?
We will now enter the slander portion of the video. I hope you enjoy your stay. Jordan Peele isn't the bad guy that a lot of people say he is. Now, the first obvious reaction to his debut was to see the racially loaded oppressed oppressor narrative, and that is in there, of course it's in there, obviously. But I don't think it's the main purpose of this film for him. People reacted very strongly to a mild lampooning of white liberal tendencies.
I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president of my lifetime, hands down.
I don't know, is that really that hateful? I mean, I personally thought that the worst bit was this scene with the invocation of slave auctions that is indicative of a very insular, ahistorical American perspective. And it's very bad for plot reasons and story reasons, as we covered, but I think it's a lot worse for the implications of Peele's projection about white people's instincts, what he thinks is going on under the surface.
Despite making up only 13% of the population.
Whereas a lot of the criticisms about white liberals is limited to, y'all ain't slick, basically.
Is it better?
Wow.
To me, it just reads as if Jordan Peele feels really awkward in these sort of situations and he starts projecting awkwardness onto others. He's writing what he assumes is going on in their heads because it's largely going on in his.
There's this great book on a place called Rosedale.
I am only making this video because I think most reactions mistakenly saw Get Out through the lens of Peele's message to white people. But I don't see it that way. I think Get Out is a lot more about Peele's own relationship to black communities and to blackness. And to understand that, you're going to have to look into Peele's early life.
I just don't want you to be shocked that he's a black man.
It is often overlooked that Jordan Peele is biracial, with a black father, Haywood Peele, and a white mother, Lucinda Williams. I'm certainly not saying he does this every time, but from the interviews I've watched with Jordan Peele, I do notice that he tends to say you when referring to white people, and we when referring to black people.
Well, really my truth as a black man.
Jordan Peele's status as mixed race may not be emphasised very much, but I think it's actually very important when discussing this film, because it's important to bear in mind that Jordan Peele is not writing from an outsider's perspective when he writes a scene like this. Peele really isn't an outsider to this sort of situation because he grew up in a white household after his father abandoned him at 7. Haywood Peele repeated the breed, fleed and sneed routine multiple times. Jordan Peele's mother tried to keep Haywood in his son's life, but he was unreliable and he was uninterested. Eventually, that broke down. And she tried to keep Haywood's son connected to black culture and communities too. Though he didn't want to do the job himself, Haywood Peele felt that she hadn't succeeded in parenting a black child. He criticised the young Jordan Peele for acting white and talking white, as he recounts in this interview. It's a very fair question if you want to ask, why mention this at all? Well, I want to be clear. This upcoming potentially slanderous psychoanalysis is not intended as an attack. I actually like Jordan Peele a heck of a lot more and felt a lot of sympathy for him when I started viewing Get Out as a projection of his personal pain and anxieties. What I see in fact as a deep-rooted insecurity and paranoia about his being an outsider in one community and his fragile, conditional membership of his father's community.
Here you go. You're gonna love this. My dad's claim to fame, he was a professor of physics at Oregon State. They published his diaries. Well, kinda. Proudest moment of my life.
Peele's main source of horror in Get Out is how Chris feels in a white community that welcomes him. Chris feels paranoid, not accepted, patronised, a guest. He feels he's a guest. From this script, it seems to me that Peele is very much carrying that weight and not feeling part of a society that he was raised in and very successful in. This film is much sadder viewed as projection, that Chris's discomfort is Peele's own paranoia and strong ethnic identification out of his mother's side of his heritage. Being abandoned by his father very clearly affected him deeply. I found this old footage of him when he was 13. It was referenced in this interview. And this gets bizarre. You probably didn't expect Bill Clinton to pop up here, but he's gonna. Peele is at this Q&A with President Bill Clinton. I know.
Mr. I'm sorry.
And he gets to ask a question. What was that question?
I was just wondering, how can you help the families where there's a mom and she's taking care of a kid or kids and the father isn't willing or isn't able to pay child support?
I don't know, maybe he's a political junkie and there's footage of him 4 years later asking President George W. Bush about corn subsidies. I don't know, but it just seems kind of relevant that that is a question he asked. Chris, like Peele, has no father in his life. That is how he was written. And Peele writes Chris's mother a tragic death in a traffic accident and makes Chris feel intense guilt for not doing enough to keep his parent around. Peele writes this movie, his first horror, a radical departure from comedy, and his first project away from his long-term comedy partner, Keegan-Michael Key. Massive psychoanalytical overreach? Maybe, you decide, but it seems that this is an ongoing desire, an ongoing, very strong motivation for Jordan Peele. This first standalone project was always going to be loaded with personal significance. And Jordan Peele made it a film where young black people have their bodies taken over by older white folk and their real selves are suppressed, kept down in the sunken place. They aren't getting to be their true identity. Now, in the mainstream critical responses to Get Out, most reviewers were simping so hard that they had esophageal friction burns, just really praising the depiction of whites as effectively nostalgic slave masters who know to keep the mask on and pretend to love equality. They loved being told they need to do better.
You've got to do better, Senator. You've got to step up.
Now, in contrast to that, I want to invite you to see Get Out as a film where Jordan Peele is horrified at a black person who isn't authentically black, who has awkward reactions, the wrong dress, the wrong vibe, someone who has the look, superficially is black, but is in their core inauthentic.
Good to see another brother around here.
I see this as Peele's projection of his fears and doubts about himself. It's Peele being worried that he isn't authentically black, that he isn't living up to Hayward's standards. Consequently, he feels he doesn't belong with that community. And that might also explain Peele's effort to prove that horror and sci-fi, his childhood and adult interests, are legitimately black interests. And that might sound like an odd point. It's kind of the focus of this interview. But you, like me, might just think, who cares? I mean, I didn't stress over whether Squid Game or Old Boy or A Bittersweet Life had some sort of authentic Anglo spirit in them. I just enjoyed them because they were great. No one talks about A Bittersweet Life. I really enjoyed it. Great film. However, if you have a deep insecurity, you might overcompensate with a strong and avowed group affiliation. If you're still wounded by your father abandoning you and disapproving of you for being too like your mother, you might go all in on identifying with your father's side, possibly throwing the other half under the bus to demonstrate loyalty.
I think the only way to, I will ever attempt to create anything again is to be vulnerable with my own emotions. And it has to, in some way, it has to be autobiographical.
As humans, we're loss averse. That is, we tend to crave what we lose more than we value what we gain. I don't think it's all that far-fetched. And I certainly don't mean it to be unsympathetic, genuinely. With this reading, you see the hidden horror of Logan as how Peele sees himself, a man obviously inauthentic who the genuine members of the culture identify as not belonging, and someone they pity.
Get out. Sorry, man.
It's really quite a melancholic reading of a horror comedy, and one that honestly feels quite uncomfortable to deliver. As sensitively as I have tried to frame this, I do still feel like it was over the line and quite insulting, just because of how darn personal this analysis is. And I really didn't intend it that way, and I've tried very hard to do it as respectfully as possible. Because if I'm right, what we're seeing here is a man's very deepest vulnerabilities on display. To recall Wilde's witticism from earlier, let's just ask, do we think here that Peele is portraying himself as Jesus or as Faust? For my money, it's got to be Faust, right? I mean, he's a guy who's gained so much, but the fear is that he's lost his soul. Now, we don't have to be that narrowly focused, that narrowly personal and psychoanalytical, thank goodness for that. We could just as easily move on, take a wider approach and see Get Out as Peele's concern for the wider black community, losing its authenticity under the influence of modern culture. It feels a lot less slanderous like that.
An oofda is a jazz-age term for Bojangle types who blacked it up for white audiences.
This would be the fear that mass media, entertainment and culture has an insidious homogenizing influence, and that engaging with that culture means black voices aren't really black. They aren't authentic.
You have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or
Trump, and you ain't black.
Maybe Peele sees a lot of Logans. People physically black but spiritually corrupted and taken over by a culture created and run by white boomers. He depicts this benign white mother figure keeping black authenticity down, restricted and locked in the sunken place. You might also see in this an unconscious resentment of his own mother, or far less slanderously, you might be reminded of the typical school teacher. But either way, it's a powerful image. This is what Jordan Peele is best at. However, I want to be sincere here, not facetious, and I think the issue of authenticity is one that we all share now. I am exposed to the same mass culture that Jordan Peele is, and I think it's done a heck of a lot to overwrite authentic Englishness. And that's something that concerns me. Now, obviously, culture is never static. There is always change, etc., etc. You know, the Bailey portion of the argument, let's just step over that hatchling nonsense. But the shared language, basically, means that American cultural products can be broadcast here unfiltered. Mostly. There are still some key differences, It really takes only a smidgen of cultural knowledge and thought to see that the current manner of dress here in Britain is not traditional. It is basically American urban wear. And rap and hip-hop are very obviously not English but dominate the charts, and English pop acts are just making their own version of that. The food and recipes that we cook and eat obviously were not eaten by my grandparents, that is very obvious, and just as mass media and greater connection across the nation of Britain began to slowly erode the very distinct county dialects and cultures that had built up over millennia, well, the American influence, among others, is very much infecting and replacing the English identity, the English culture, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes not. It's a very obvious point, but it seems quite apt here. In June 2020, violent racial demonstrations took place in Britain, terrorising Whitehall, and that was in response to an incident in America. A narrative about police violence that is shaky enough in America is just absolutely ludicrous when it is applied here, but nevertheless, it was. Because of the homogenising influence of culture, people really felt that it was their issue here. It was not an English protest, but it happened here. I imagine it's probably not what you expected when you clicked on this video, but I hope you can see why I'd actually be very sympathetic towards Peele and his concern about cultural domination, because I have the same one. Moreover, I really feel a loss for the culture that I would have had. I would very much like to continue on my grandfather's culture, but thanks to globalization and mass culture, I don't think I can. I mean, I barely know where to look. But in that sense, I share that concern with Jordan Peele. And Peele's interest is sensible, it's logical, responsible, it's practical. Maybe I'm just overthinking this, but I really want to understand Get Out. There are times when all the world's asleep, but the questions run too deep for such a simple mind. Now, won't you please tell me what we've learned? I know, it sounds absurd. Societies and industries of mass and scale are very efficient at getting you something you want at the lowest price as soon as possible. But something that they cannot do is subtlety. The entertainment industry saw Get Out's success, its massive success, and they didn't see very current concerns about authenticity in the face of mass culture. They saw hating on white people, and maybe they were predisposed, who knows, who could speculate. Regardless, they started pumping out increasingly unsubtle rip-offs, these anti-white, anti-Western horror movies, many admittedly produced by Jordan Peele's own production company, Monkey Paw Productions. Monkey's Paw? I told you he was going for Faust. I told you. Alright, anyway, all cultures end up forming a general consensus over what is okay and what is not okay. In the realm of politics, the range of publicly acceptable opinions is generally referred to as the Overton window, and it has changed a lot. In the world of health, what is an acceptable healthy size has changed a lot as well. That's generally referred to as the Overton window. I think there should be an equivalent for entertainment, because Get Out's success seemed to justify a remarkable drop in subterfuge and an increase in how blatantly divisive intersectional identity politics could be broadcast in mainstream entertainment. For instance, compare the first Purge film, where things are noticeable, obviously, but they're unspoken, it's subtext. Compare that to the fourth one. Consider that Alice is coming out, which is the second film in 3 years where the plot is America is still doing slavery. Right now.
No, in real life.
As I said, mass culture does not do subtlety. I much prefer my reading of Get Out as a struggle to find authenticity in the face of mass culture, because with this reading, Get Out is actually talking about a problem that we all share across all racial, class, geographic divides. It's something we're all facing right now, and that makes it, for all of us, a very personal film.
The whole process of figuring out what this movie was about digging deep and exploring my fears first, and trusting that if I got that across, that we're all human, we're all made up of the same emotions.
Cheers, Jordan Peele. Highlighting that division really brought us all together. Cheers.